But in a way, the word apocalypse, which I referred to this as, Schrodinger's is a dead or alive zombie. Viruses are dead or neither dead nor alive. Schrodinger's zombie apocalypse. The only word we didn't mess with is apocalypse, which means to uncover. It's to reveal. In fact, people think of Apocalypse, Book of Revelation, but they don't make a connection that the word apocalypse means to reveal the truth.
Yeah, no, we don't talk about that.
And so what's happening here is people are getting glimpses of the wizard behind the curtain. I like to say I'm the wizard in front of the curtain, for all my foibles and human shortcomings. But the fact is that that there are so many different little pieces of the rabbit hole, from the pharmaceutical industrial complex to the vaccine thing, to the anti-vaxxers, to the truthers, to the Bill Gates, to the Illuminati, to the QAnon, to the electromagnetic spectrum, to 5G, all of these. And I'm not judging any of them as true or not true.
You don't know.
I'm just saying that they're all out there and they're all in this same stew. And whatever it is you believe, you don't know the truth. And that's what everyone is realizing now, that, oh, that's stupid. You watch the media go to work on 5G, which all of a sudden has just, popped into people's minds, although the research and the stuff has been there for years, electromagnetism in general. I have a client friend, Katie Singer, who wrote a book called The Electronic Silent Spring. She wrote that book, 2000, maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And people know Rachel Carson's Silent Spring about DDT and it beginning the movement of the attempt to eliminate poisons from our environment. But we haven't, glyphosate, Monsanto, blah, 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 haven't done very well.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we're dying of diseases, because we are poisoning ourselves.
Yes.
And Katie's book, The Electronic Silent Spring, that was way before 5G. But the point is, now all of a sudden, when people are waking up to the fact that maybe some of this stuff isn't healthy, I've seen in the last few days articles from Wired magazine to the New York Times to on CNN, basically making fun of any idiot who would connect 5G, to this virus. I mean, I saw one commentator say, it is just so frightening to think that there are people so stupid that they actually believe that the virus can be carried on 5G. Now, I don't know anyone who's saying that, except the person who is saying it to make people look stupid. But
right.
The point here is not what you believe. It's that none of it's true, and it's all true. Where do we go from here?
Exactly. That's the question. You know what? I think that's the guiding question. Where do we go from here? Because there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere.
Well, and going back to Joseph Campbell, the first step on the hero's journey, is the betrayal or the separation, or the ego death. I mean, in a way, although he doesn't refer, he might in some of his writing, but what we think of as the betrayal or the separation that sends, everyone, whether it's Harry Potter, or Luke in Star Wars, or Zarathustra, whoever it is that goes on the journey goes into the underworld, into the, it's not the way I thought it was. It deals with grief and separation and obstructions and resistance, and then eventually can overcome it, and then comes back and teaches, then comes back and brings, like Zarathustra, I'm like a honeybee returning with the honey.
Yes.
But in a way, where do we go from here is we acknowledge that we have entered into a realm that no training has prepared us for, other than maybe spiritual training.
Yeah.
The information doesn't work. And I love to, you had mentioned when we talked the other day, about the role of this elongate, no, that's the wrong word, this extended period of time of Mercury in Pisces doing a circular dance with Neptune, who's in a forever in Pisces, if you will.
Yes.
And I think that even though we're looking at Uranus and Taurus, we're looking at the Saturn Pluto thing, we're looking at Jupiter now coming and Mars, I mean, we're looking at all these things. It's easy to overlook the deepest, or maybe the most functional culprit in all of this on a very deep level, being Neptune.
Yes, especially with virus, I always think of that. But it's interesting, you know, especially since I'm spending so much time in India, the nodes, like how we overlook the nodal influence in Western astrology, and how in India that's like number one. Like
So
my guru was like, that eclipse on Christmas, that's it. That's what's
Yep. Well, that Christmas eclipse, I was in Singapore where it was total. I went to Singapore because I was already in Indonesia.
Right.
So I spent 3 days in Singapore, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It was an annular eclipse, so it didn't get dark, but there was the ring, you know, I mean, it was amazing.
Wow.
And it was very strange being in a field in the marina in Singapore with, I don't know, maybe 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 people, you know, on a hot sunny day, with telescopes and electronic gadgets and kind of all being amazed by this. But that eclipse, and then of course the following eclipse the day before the Saturn Pluto. No, see, but there's two things I want to touch base on. One is eclipses and one is Neptune.
Yes.
The thing about eclipses that people There you are. You're back.
Okay, good. We're back. Okay, yeah.
Okay. So did you hear the thing about Jeff Green?
No, that's where I got right before you said that. Tell me.
Okay, so many years ago, Jeff said about my third house, Pluto, which is trine the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, Mercury being my chart ruler in the 11th house, Pluto in the third house. And the midpoint of Pluto and my Aries stellium is my Gemini rising. And he said, your job is to basically, through words, to destroy people's sense of what they thought was real. So
that's why I love you.
Here's the thing about nodes. Okay, so the word node is a Greek word which means knot, K-N-O-T. And in fact, when they talk about the node of a cancer cell, it's just basically where reality is tied up in a knot. You know, it's where there's a lump. That's the node.
Yeah.
And we particularly focus on the nodes of the moon. But if you're standing at a still pond and you throw a rock in the pond and watch the ripples extend outward, you know, the water isn't moving outward. The energy transference is moving outward. If you put a float like a bobber and then on still water and then throw the rock, as the ripples come through, the bobber just goes up and down in place and the ripples keep moving through. Unless you're a surfer and you catch the wave, but that's something else. It's an important piece of this though. But basically what happens is those ripples will extend out until it becomes smooth again. Now, if you throw two rocks simultaneously in the water and they both make ripples going out, and those ripples are moving, where those ripples intersect, they make nodes. Because what happens is that the ripples keep moving, but the nodal points as to where those waves intersect, they don't move.
Wow.
They hold their position. And in fact, and here's where it gets important, those points send out secondary waves. We call them interference patterns. So the points at which waves intersect create nodes or knots that then send out additional ripples.
Wow.
All right, so Maya, which a lot of people would, especially in the East in Vedic traditions, will associate with the nodes, you know, that Maya might be described as, you know, the veil, the curtain that prevents us from seeing the true nature of reality.
Yeah.
All right, that veil is actually the interference patterns created by the ripples. So let me ask you a question. If I hit my hand on the desk here, what's real? What's solid? No thing. There are no things in the universe. The universe consists of no things. There are no things in the universe because things are just the result of interference patterns of ripples that are being created, rippling out from atoms and molecules at the rate of hundreds of trillions of times a second. Hundreds, thousands of trillions of times a second. The universe is blinking on and off at hundreds of trillions. I mean, when you look at the color green, you see green, but that's just the trick of the mind. What you're actually seeing is ripples at 560 trillion cycles every second. And so the nodes of these very high, incredibly, we can't even imagine how high frequency these events are. When they intersect with each other, they create the illusion of solidity. I mean, a cosmic ray that is vibrating at the rate of trillions of cycles a second passes through the earth as if it's not there. You know why? Because it's not there. It's Maya. It's the illusion that we have of our reality tunnel. And of course, I love Albert Einstein's famous line that reality is just an illusion, albeit a very persistent one.
I love that, yes.
Now, he also said that time is the universe's way of preventing everything from occurring at the same moment.
Yeah.
So we have nodes that are basically where things ripple into the three-dimensional appearance. And yes, the primal node is the moon around the earth and the earth around the sun. And where those 2 points intersect, they create the loudest intersection, you know, because a rhythm by itself there's nothing to frame it against. There's no frame of reference. Right. But as soon as you have two rhythms, you have that frame of reference of when do those ripples intersect? Where do they meet? And in fact, when we have things like the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction or the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, those are like ripples meeting at the same place like a new moon is.
Right.
So nodes are incredibly important and way beyond even what we think of. Now, here's another thing. I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by when there are beliefs in different cultures that are either the same and the cultures are incredibly far apart, or they're different for good reason. I'll give you an example. You can say the planet Mars and go to pretty much any culture on the planet, and they have a mythology that's fairly consistent with how we know Mars is. It's angry, it's red, it's you know, it's difficult to manage when it expresses. You know, Mars is how we create boundaries, how we conquer, how we defend, you know, all those things. And although people might have different nuances as to how malefic it really is, or as to what it might do in this culture versus that culture, generally it's the same.
Yeah.
Now, we take a look at something like garlic. Garlic in the Western tradition is considered to be a substance that keeps the vampires away.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm not making light of this. This is part of garlic's healing properties is that it prevents evil spirits from inhabiting a body. It's used to ward off evil.
Yeah.
Now, it comes in an environment of, you know, the Catholic tradition and the Eastern European tradition. In particular, I'm thinking in the cultures, you know, in Poland, in Italy, in Greece, in the Eastern European countries, and in that tradition, things are basically, the Catholic Church is built upon the symbol of 90 degrees, the cross. It's, if it's not real, it ain't real. Saturn, Satan is the absolute delimiter of good and evil, period.
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, you know, the fallen angel, Lucifer, comes through the gates of Saturn and becomes manifest in the three-dimensional world.
Yeah.
So in that realm, garlic is important because it keeps all those non-physical things away,
Yes.
which are frightening if you don't really believe they're real, but they're real enough that you basically practice something to keep them away.
Yes.
Now, let's jump to the sutras, because in the Buddhist sutras, the sutras basically say you can't eat garlic. In Hinduism, in the Vedic tradition, you know, garlic is tamasic.
Rajasic.
It creates thickness in the body that creates desire.
Right, rajasic.
Think about Italy.
Yeah.
They eat a lot of garlic to keep the vampires away, but they're enwrapped in their sense of pursuit of desire and of beauty and of love.
So into pleasure, yeah. It's all like...
Now, in the Buddhist culture, the sutras basically forbid you from eating garlic. Do you know why?
Why?
Because the spirit guides don't like the smell.
The spirit guides, so they don't get the good spirits either.
Well, but in Italy, there are no good spirits. They're evil.
Yeah.
And in Buddhism, there are no bad spirits. They're all spirits. They may have different cross purposes and whatever.
Right.
You know, but do you see how
yes.
that tells me something that's very real about garlic? Because when you frame it in the cultures, all of a sudden, wow, you can see why these people framed whether it was good or bad so differently based upon what their assumptions were about reality and disincarnate reality.
Yes.
Now, you look at the nodes, and the difference in interpretation from the East and West I find fascinating.
Yes.
Because in the East, no, let's start off in the West, in modern Western astrology, where nodes have become more important since the advent of consciousness studies. You know, I mean, it certainly, the nodes have become more important with evolutionary astrology, with the use of Pluto and the nodes and so on, and all planetary nodes for that matter. But nodes are basically considered to be bipolar. North node good, south node bad. This is in the West. The North node is the purpose of the soul. It's where we're going. It's what we're aspiring towards. It's not about our physical reality, but it's like the soul came in, and the South node is what we did in past lives or early childhood or our genetics. It's what we learned in the past. It's what but Freud clearly showed that under pressure, there's this thing called infantile regression. Don't go to your south node under pressure. You got to keep working toward the north node because that's good.
Right.
All right.
Totally.
And in Vedic astrology, you know, the north node ain't so good and the south node's worse.
Yes.
Why? Because it's all Maya. Because in the West, we assume that he who accumulates the most is successful. Right. Whether those things are material or metaphysical, we still think that there's a purpose to all of this, and that it's not about illusion. It's about going in that direction. What Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche, you know, called, you know, spiritual materialism. Yes. The idea that there's somewhere to go, you know, in the spiritual pursuit. You know?
Yes.
But meanwhile, in the East, the nodes, the south node can be more difficult. And I'm not a Vedic practitioner. You know, I know enough to be conversant and perhaps a little dangerous at times. But the fact of the matter is that, again, looking at the difference in how we perceive them culturally tells me more about what they really are than what either people say.
And based on that,
Neptune.
Okay.
Neptune.
Great.
And then I'm going to shut up.
No, don't shut up. No, we don't want you to shut up.
Neptune keyword for Neptune. Oh, there's lots of keywords for Neptune. You know, I mean, look, Neptune only has one purpose in the universe, and that's to dissolve the hard edges of Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you put salt, Saturn, in water, Neptune, and the hard edges dissolve.
Yeah.
You know, things that don't melt or dissolve in water, you put them in alcohol, called the universal solvent to the chemist, because, and that's why we use alcohol as a cleanser, because alcohol dissolves those things which don't dissolve in water, and therefore it takes the hard edges of the crystals of dirt or oil and it melts them.
Yeah.
So Neptune is basically about melting away the apparent surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
It's the, and I remember that Rob Hand wrote, geez, I think it might have been in Horoscope Symbols a long time ago. He wrote, it used to be said that Saturn was reality and Neptune was illusion. Whereas now we believe that Neptune may be reality and Saturn was the illusion there was one.
Yes, I love that. And that especially rings true right now.
All right. So there's a whole lot of Neptune stuff. We could go down that path, I mean, for hours, because Neptune doesn't have any time attached to it. And
very connected to the unconscious and the collective unconscious.
A very important keyword for Neptune is confusion.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, why do you think Neptune is associated with confusion?
Because it's like a fog. It obfuscates. It's
all right.
weaving even more illusion. And
all right, Rick the etymologist is going to come in here, because the word confusion actually comes from two words. Con, Greek, which is like with, you know, like a conjunction.
Right.
You know, it's the same as, it's like a, you know, the C-O-N is together as one.
Con, yeah.
Fusion.
Fusion.
What does fusion mean?
Like the merging.
All right. So if I'm living under the illusion that I am Rick and you are Shireen, and then I become enamored with you, and then I kind of fall into your eyes, and then I think, God, you're amazing. And then I kind of get to a place where, you know what, I really love you. And I lose all sense of my boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go, wait a minute, this is confusing. You see, because love is confusing.
Yes.
Because confusion occurs when the illusion of separateness turns into a perception.
Mm-hmm.
That, in other words, when the illusion of separateness breaks down.
Right.
And so, in fact, there's a couple of ways to induce hypnotic trances. One of them is called, is some scholars or some hypnotists, academics call it mother hypnosis and father hypnosis. The mother hypnosis is a very gradual, soothing, you know, look into my eyes, your eyes are getting heavy, you know, they're going to begin to water and think, and oh yeah, they are. Oh, and now they're beginning to blink. Oh yeah, they're blink. And it's a gradual feeding back of things that are already occurring until the mind becomes relaxed enough to take the external as the internal. Boundaries become confused.
Yes, yes.
The other way, which is sometimes referred to as the father technique, is kind of a rapid fire alternating, you're hot, you're cold, you're tall, you're short, you're this, you're that, you're mine. You know, which, and so this confusion of not knowing what reality is and losing our sense of boundary, not just between self and other, but between fact and fiction, between male and female, between any reality that is bipolar and breaks down, that becomes confusion, which is what Neptune's job is, because in the imagination, there are no boundaries. One of my loves throughout my life has been scuba diving. And when you get down to about 30 or 40 feet in the ocean and you kind of, you know, stabilize your pressure and you take a few deep breaths and you go, oh, and then you realize that there are no walls between you and anything in the ocean.
Wow.
it's very much like being in the unconscious in a dream.
Yeah, yeah.
There are no boundaries.
Yes.
You know, all the monsters, all the sharks, the Loch Ness, well, not Loch Ness because it's locked up, but you know, in a way, the thing about Neptune is that when boundaries are dissolved, the ego functions on the ability to say, this is what Rick, this is what Shireen. The ego basically, you know, in the Freudian definition, it's about long-term survival. Survival of what? Of the illusion that I am separate from you.
Yeah.
And it's an important function because if I didn't have that illusion, I wouldn't survive.
Yeah.
I would melt back into the Neptunian, Piscean, you know, ocean of the sludge of everything that is out there, you know, that eventually returns to the seas, whether it's the Pacific Ocean or the seas of consciousness.
Yes.
It's still, that's Pisces Neptune land. So with Mercury having gone through Pisces seemingly forever,
yes,
wrapped around this ultimate, this is real, with Saturn basically testing the limits of the boundaries of the authority and the structure and the banks and the finances and the governments and the belief systems. And into that, it runs into Pluto, which says the most important things now shall begin to disintegrate. They shall begin to disintegrate so that we can reconstruct them in ways like a butterfly that can happen on a higher order of intelligence. And into that whole mess comes Neptune and Mercury saying, yeah, but you don't know what's going on. You don't have the plan. You don't have the blueprint. You don't know what the mess is. You don't know where you're coming from. And you don't know where you're going to.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yes.
Welcome to my world.
How is that your world?
Because I'm an Aries and my world is your world is everyone's world.
Well, how did you feel on April 10th when he finally, your ruling planet finally switched out of Pisces after that long experience?
Well, look, my solar return was on the Jupiter, it was within 24 hours of the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction full moon. That was my solar return.
What? This is gonna be
I definitely feel a return of some clarity.
Yeah.
But in my chart, you see, Neptune, my Neptune is at 1344 Libra.
Mm.
My Venus is at 1344 Aries.
Oh, there you go.
Now you want to talk about an opposition. That is in fact, because I have that in my chart, I've observed over the years, and I've only seen maybe a half a dozen of these in all the charts that I've done over 30, 40 years of two planets, major planets in conjunction, square, or opposition that are at the same minute, not partile, not same degree, but same degree and same minute. So my Neptune and my Venus are at the same degree and same minute, and my Neptune is not only opposed Venus, but it's also very tightly opposed the Sun, Mars, Mercury, and square the Moon. So I got a Neptune that kicks.
You do, no wonder. And there you go with no wonder you live young at a young age. Because I feel like when you have that kind of I feel like people with those really epic oppositions we love Jung. Because he's
well, yeah, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, the reconciliation of the opposites, right? That's like, how do you reconcile those opposites?
Well, you don't, and you do.
Right.
You do by making shit up and by going to Neptune and basically going to you change the rules of the game and you go to a different order of magnitude where those opposites are now points on some other dimension. Mm-hmm. You know, but
how you've lived it with your, you know, your dance with the archetypes, your dance with the eternal, your dance with the infinite, your dance with these different, with the language of the sublime.
Yeah, I've said many times over the years, I mean, for 30 years, that if I didn't have to make a living, I would just write poetry, which is probably, and play music. I mean, poetry and music to me, and for me, astrology is a bit of both of those, but it's a poor substitute, even though it's very useful. Poetry unto itself is poetry. Music unto itself is music. Poetry is as close as words can get to music. And astrology basically takes all of that and wraps it up. And that's my attraction to astrology. When I look at a chart, I'm not looking at a visual chart. I'm basically looking at a physical representation of the hum of the universe at that moment. You know, it's how are these, you know, we don't even think of this, but you know, in geometry, a chord is defined as the connection between 2 points on a circle. So if you have a circle and you connect 2 points, that's a chord. Um, and in music, a chord is any 2 notes on the circle of harmonic vibrations, because it was Pythagoras who basically realized that any note to its octave is double or half the vibration, but it's basically the same point at another octave. So music is not just 88 notes going from, you know, from the, you know, low A all the way up to the high E or whatever the high note is, the 88 notes. It also creates this cycle. And when you create a chord, you're basically taking 2 points and on the circle, on the cycle, and we astrologers call chords aspects. Because, and when you're looking at a chart and you see an aspect or a configuration where you have a chord with several notes in it, a grand trine or a T-square, or a quintile yod where you have 3 points on a 5-pointed star, like Jim Morrison and William Blake, with the same planets, except where Blake had a Saturn, he was an engraver and a traditionalist, even though he broke the mold. Where he had Saturn, Morrison had Neptune. I mean, you can't make it up anymore, amazingly, than that. But in fact, astrology to me is basically, it's how light has tied itself into nodes, into knots, and it becomes the hum of the light as it's moving through our life, or I should say, maybe not as it's moving through our life, but maybe I should say as our life is moving through this physical mass that has its own trajectory.
Well, that would make sense. Even I was just thinking how, you know, here every morning we have these elaborate fire rituals with Vedic chanting to the planets, you know, and how important it's like these offerings are, but it's the sound, you know, how these deities, planets as deities, will only respond to very specific tones. Like you have to get the sound just precisely.
I totally concur with that whole, yeah. I mean, that's part of my love of music.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
I love that.
And if there's one thing in the, well, there's lots of things in the Vedic tradition that I really admire and use in my life. But the idea, not so much, I mean, one of the problem spots I have in the Vedic tradition, because every astrology comes out of the time in which it was created. And I do have, by the way, I listened to, tell me the name of the kid who is,
something. I don't know how to say it. Abhigya?
Yeah. I was absolutely fascinated for about 20 minutes, and then I turned it off. I said, I can't listen to this anymore. And it's basically, and Western astrology does the same thing, is what I'm going to say about Vedic astrology. It's just that Vedic astrology is more closely connected to its tradition, whereas in the West, we've reinvented or invented a modern tradition that now we have a throwback that many people are now going back to the ancient tradition too. And I have the same problem with some, not all. I don't have problems with the techniques or with the ideas or even the practitioners, but I have a problem with the way the languaging is phrased based upon what the life was, whether it was in Greece or Rome or Spain in the 900s or in India during the, whatever period. Things were much more fated. We didn't have human growth. We didn't have the potential of going on a hero's journey. What the journey you went on was, you were born into this body, you did your karma, you went into war, like Arjuna, whether you were a pacifist or not, you did your duty and you died. And the better you did your duty, the better you were as a person. And that was something that was important
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's important or important in the same way now, because what's important now is that each and every one of us goes on that journey inward, that hero's journey, whether you do it through whatever, whether you do it through breathing techniques or rebirthing or yoga or Jungian analysis or transpersonal analysis or Rolfing or Aikido or Wim Hof breathing, or I don't care what technique you use, it doesn't matter. But what happens is you confront your own shadow, you confront your own shit, and you basically try to live a life that allows your planets to hum in the best possible manner. I mean, look, if you have a retrograde planet,
yes,
and let's say you had a retrograde planet 300 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Let's say it was a retrograde Venus, just because we're coming up to a retrograde Venus.
and I want to talk to you about that. And I was born with a retrograde Venus.
Well, lucky you. And I don't say that sarcastically, you see, because planets are like radio stations, and the closer we are to the source of the radio signal, the louder it is. Matter of fact, in Western astrology, there was a technique called distance values that seems to have fallen away. And the distance value was between 0 and 1, and it represented how close a planet could be versus how far a planet from Earth could be, and where it is in your chart. So if you were born with a retrograde planet, you know, retrograde planets are always closer to Earth than non-retrograde planets. And in fact, that's what makes them retrograde. We lose perspective. It's like being in the subway car and looking out the window and seeing the train on the track next to you going backwards, and then realizing, oh no, it's not going backwards. I'm just going faster than it forward. And it's so close, you don't have any perspective.
Right.
When Mercury or Venus get closest to Earth, they're conjunct with the sun because they're on the same side of the Earth as the sun. They're closest to the Earth.
Yeah.
When Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, when any of those go retrograde, they're on the same side of the sun as the Earth, but Earth is in the middle, so they're in opposition to the sun, but they're closest to Earth, which means if you have an outer planet, you know, within, let's say, I don't know, roughly, you know, 90 degrees, it's less than that actually. But if you have planets that are close to an opposition to the sun, that planet is louder than an outer planet that's conjunct the sun. Because if you have Pluto conjunct the sun, you have to go to the distance of the sun and then to Pluto. It's 90 million miles twice. It's 180 million miles, you know, farther away.
Interesting.
Again, I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
There you're back. So let's say let's just hypothesize that you were born with a Venus retrograde. Oh, you were. Okay. What that tells me is that Venus in your chart is louder than it is in quote unquote normal charts. Now that is fantastic if you can move into a space in your life where you can open up your heart, where you can learn how to love, learn how to receive love, where you can in some way engage in that dance with beauty and with the magic that's associated with aesthetic perfection. But if you're living on a farm, you know, you just need to weed the goddamn planets and shut the fuck up. Stop talking about how beautiful the clouds are.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, if you have a retrograde planet, you know, Jung, I think, I heard Jim Lewis say this many years ago, and it's something that I don't know the exact quote, but, you know, one of Jung's fascinations with astrology, I mean, really comes down to the point that every planet in the chart just wants to be heard.
Yes.
Every planet, you know, when we do analysis, we're basically learning those fragmented pieces that have either been unconsciously repressed or consciously suppressed. And we're trying to get in touch with them so that we can basically reclaim the power, because in the shadow, they have power over us. We don't have power over them. And so when we shine the light of awareness into the shadow realms, into the cave, into the unconscious, that's when we begin to do the work. That's when we begin to do the dance.
Yes.
Ancients didn't have that as an opportunity.
That's a good point.
So retrograde planets fucked them up because they were so loud, they had nowhere to express. What happens with unexpressed planets? Projection. And therefore, they were dealt with out there. Why is the 12th house such a difficult house?
I know, because of the time, because of it's exactly, that's a good point.
Because it's projected.
Yeah.
It's